So we are here with Bo Bullock and Brian Furman and Derek Banks, and they're going to present about their CredDefense Toolkit, which they released at DerbyCon. And we also have a blog post, and so this is just to flesh out all of that stuff. So I
All
will
right.
let you guys go ahead.
Okay. Like Sierra was saying, this is if anyone was at our DerbyCon talk, we've at least rearranged the slides a little bit. And if you have any questions, please ask. We're going to present it, I guess, a little bit differently, and then we're also going to attempt to show demos. So that ought to go over pretty well, because that always goes over pretty well. I assume that a lot of people know who we are. If you don't, hi, I'm Derek Banks. We also have Bo Bullock and Brian Fairman. So we did a presentation at DerbyCon on some things that we see with a lot of clients, like attacks that work over and over again. And we're often asked, well, how do we detect those things? Like, what can we do to, what could we have possibly done to detect the things that you did, mainly after post exploitation? So when we essentially gather credentials, and we do that with native tools, maybe some PowerShell, and we take advantage of issues with Microsoft configuration that and weak passwords. And so we thought we'd write a toolkit that would help detect these things. And now let me go to the next slide. All right, so like I was saying, generally post-exploitation is about gathering and abusing credentials. First and foremost, the passwords that people choose are very critical. We often take advantage of poor password choices, and I think a great example of that straight out of the Security 504 material is season and year. I mean, you have to change your password every 90 days. So, hey, summer 2017, that is a great password. Actually, now it would be autumn 2017, right? Another credential abuse attack is something known as Kerberoasting. So the gist of that is that someone can go and grab a service principal name, from Kerberos of a service account, and crack the password. Also, things like LMNR and NBNS, where you can get a hash and attempt to crack. So weak passwords are something that we abuse all of the time. So this toolkit is a collection of things that we put together to either deter or detect this kind of credential abuse. So some of the things that we're going to talk about: a password filter to keep people from choosing poor passwords to begin with, and then also further auditing of those passwords, where you can go and see who's really using really bad passwords, like past summer 2017. How about company name 123? I mean, that's a terrible password. And then another core component of this, we were kind of talking about at the very beginning, is consolidating endpoint log files and authentication, like from domain controllers. So centralizing those logs so you can run analysis on them, and from that analysis find out if people are performing these attacks in your environment. And then also, we're talking about Responder with LMNR. Responder is a tool that is popular that will gather these potentially, or gather these hashes that are potentially weak. So the toolkit altogether is, honestly, it's a whole bunch of duct tape and popsicle sticks with a little bit of chewing gum. It's some C#, some PowerShell, and it's very much a work in progress. We put this together to really be an open source project that people could help us build on and that you could use in your environment. We didn't really see any good free tools that were available. There may be some out there. I mean, there's certainly some commercial stuff, but we wanted this to be free. A lot of the stuff that Black Hills puts out is free as in beer, just because we want to give back to the community and give people tools to make a difference where they work. So part of the core of this is consolidating endpoint logs, and what I mean by that is, essentially for these purposes, or for this purpose, is Windows endpoint logs. So what kind of information can you get from a Windows endpoint? Well, beyond this talk, there's a wealth of information, and we hardly see any of our customers ever using this, this kind of technique. So usually we find one of two scenarios with logging in general, with our clients. The first is that, everything is being shoved into a SIM, and that's because your SIM vendor told you to do that. Coincidentally, your SIM vendor gets paid by how much you ingest, so of course they're going to say, yeah, put all of that in there. And because of all that data, it's really unwieldy to try and do any kind of search or get any kind of actionable data. I think my favorite is that, especially when compliance says this, that logs are reviewed daily. I'm not even sure what that really means. And you're going to look at every log file in your environment on a daily basis. That sounds like a horrible task. And then the other scenario is no centralized logging at all and no visibility whatsoever in what's happening. So, hey, I don't see it, so it's not there. That's really not a good strategy either. And so both scenarios, are when we get the question, hey, what could I have possibly done to detect you? So, either us as pen testers or an actual attacker, they're not going to get caught in that scenario. So, earlier this year we put out a blog post and did a webcast on how to use NXlog to shove logs into to an elk stack. And similar to that, core component of this is not taking all of the endpoint logs. All of the application security and system logs do not need to get sent into the Windows Event Forwarder. You actually want to pick and choose. And so my blog post goes over, what you need for this tool set, and it also covers, some things I also thought were important, specifically Sysmon, and then also the Kerberoast logs. So not everything, but so that way you're getting actionable intelligence. And so the great thing about Windows Event Forwarding, which I find a lot of people don't even know that Microsoft has a built-in way where you can get endpoint logs into a central location, is Windows Event Forwarding. You can configure this through group policy. It scales to an enterprise size. And then from the Windows Event Forwarder, you can use something like NXlog or any like Kiwi syslog. You could shove things into Elasticsearch and use Kibana to then ask questions of the data. You could also use, like the question earlier, you could use a Splunk forwarder to then send that stuff into Splunk. But the great thing about Windows Event Forwarder paired with NXlog and ELK is, well, it's free. You don't have to pay the SIM vendor for that. If you don't have a SIM, or if you're in the scenario where you have a SIM and you can't get any real good data out of it, this is probably a good solution.
Hey, Derek, I have a couple questions.
Okay.
So Benjamin says, does SolarWinds LEM work?
I have no experience with SolarWinds LEM. I am not sure what that is. I am sorry. I can go take a look after the presentation and maybe get back via email, but I assume it's some kind of SIM. As long as there is a way for JSON data to be parsed, you might have to write a parser. You could use NXlog, or if they have a forwarder that will handle Windows event logs, I think that it probably would.
He says it's a logging event manager.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have experience with it.
Okay.
But I would imagine there's probably a way to make it work. And if not, since you're paying them, you could open up a ticket, a feature request, right? And they may make something work for you.
Okay, cool. Another question is, where can I find the suggested events to log?
Yeah, so that's a good question. In putting this presentation together, originally it was for DerbyCon, so we were trying to shoot for, 40 minutes. So we had about 48 slides or so. That's why we had those the companion blog post for it. So in the blog post, I outline what I think is important to get started, which is all the authentication and group activity event IDs from the security log. And then also the sysmon logs, you have to install sysmon, and in the blog post I suggest using a configuration file. A great place to get a configuration file is the Swift on Security configuration file. You'll have to modify it for your environment, but there's a whole lot of stuff that's already whitelisted. So one of the problems with sysmon is when you install it, it's very noisy until you tune it. But once you tune it, it gives you some really great information. And then also from your domain controllers, you'll want to get not only the application and group activity event IDs, you want to get the Kerberoast ticket event, which is 4769, 4679. So in addition to those, the NSA Spot the Adversary list is probably where I would go next. And then there's also, is it Windows Archaeology? Malware Archaeology, I think, has a good list too. So, but definitely avoid just shoving it all in there. You'll fall into that, again, that category of logging too much and now I can't see things.
Cool. All right. Well, that's the only question for now, so you can go ahead.
Okay, cool.
And I posted the link to the blog in the chat too, so for you guys.
Okay, sweet. So this is sort of an overview of how Windows Event Forwarder works in true Microsoft fashion. There's lots of moving parts to this. So in a nutshell, group policy is where your endpoints are going to get configured to forward events to the Windows Event Server. And the way they're going to do that is the group policy essentially sets some permissions and some services up to enable this, and then says, hey, I want you to check into this server to get your events. And there's two ways that you can configure Windows Event Forwarder. You can do a configuration where the Windows Event Server will go off and grab from all the endpoints. That's probably not the best way to do it. You could, the other way is a subscription where essentially the Windows Event Forwarder tells the systems that check in, hey, this subscription applies to you. You need to send me these logs, and then those logs will get sent, and they end up on the Windows Event Forwarder system in an event log called forwarded events. So there's like a separate Windows event. If you look in the event viewer, you would see all those logs start to populate inside of that Windows of that event log. And then from there, like I said before, nxlog sending JSON data directly to an elk stack, so that you have in this scenario, an analyst can ask the WEF server questions using C# or PowerShell and existing scripts. So beyond what we've done, there's other things that are out there, such as the Deep Blue CLI stuff that you could run to look for things that potentially would be bad, and then also setting up dashboards and queries in Kibana in the Elk stack. So I've kind of talked a little bit about this. Collecting the right thing. And I think this question, I had a slide that essentially answers this. The details for setting all this up are in the blog post. And I guess one thing I didn't mention also is PowerShell. So with PowerShell version 5, there's a whole lot of things that are logged. And we've had some clients recently that are logging and monitoring PowerShell usage, and it's set up correctly. It's actually quite effective. We had a really large client recently, detecting everything we were doing in PowerShell within, I think it was like an hour, and it was a huge place. And I was really impressed that, hey, look, they're collecting, or they're alerting on this bad PowerShell that we're running, because normal PowerShell activity doesn't necessarily look like the same activity that an attacker or a pen tester is doing. It's different, and consolidating those logs and doing analysis on them is important. And so here are some of the event IDs specifically for authentication and group activity. And one thing we haven't talked about yet is honey accounts. So if you're consolidating all of your authentication ID or authentication event IDs, you can set up accounts that are fake accounts that no one should ever log into. And if you see it, then it's an alert. And specifically, this is good for Kerberoasting. Also, failed login frequency, and then for a whole bunch of failed logins from one workstation, we're going to touch on that here in a minute, is generally a bad thing. And then not mentioned on this is you should also probably look at how, successful logins, specifically successful logins from one system, because, Susie from accounting probably should not be logged into 27 workstations in a given day. I think that probably indicates that something bad is happening there. And so I've mentioned the blog post a couple of times, and there's lots of details in the setup. And certainly after this webcast, if you go through the setup and you have any questions, please reach out to us. And so here's an example in my lab of detecting some password spraying, and basically through ELK. We're going to talk about it a little bit differently here in a little bit. So I've touched on Kerberoasting. If you haven't heard of Kerberoasting, this is an attack where anytime we get a foothold in the environment, we attempt this first. A guy named Tim Medine came up with this attack. And you could do a whole presentation on Kerberoasting and the implementation of Microsoft's implementation of Kerberoast. We have one slide on it. So the gist of it is that any user is able to query the domain for a service through service principal names for an account that's associated with running a service such as SQL or IIS. And so a request to authenticate to that, or a request to authenticate to that service over Kerberoast gives the user a ticket that a portion of that ticket is encrypted with the service account's NTLM hash. And so effectively, any user in the environment can get a hash that they can take offline and spend as much time as they want to crack it. And so as much resources as they have. So unless that password changes, and typically service accounts in a lot of places don't change frequently, a user could eventually crack that. Well, how do you detect that? So probably one of the better ways is to set up a fake honey token account or a fake service principal name, and then alert anytime you ever see that, because a user will never do that. They'll never ask for that fake SPN. You have to be careful, though. You don't want to create an SPN that is going to duplicate something you have in your environment, or you're not going to be able to authenticate to the legit service. The event ID that's associated with that is we wrote some PowerShell to alert on event 4769, and so the PowerShell script, when I run it on an event log, takes about 5 minutes to run. So I figured that people probably wouldn't really want to sit around for 5 minutes while you're waiting for this to run. So so as far as the demo purposes here, I'll show you what it looks like. Let's see if I can show. All right, can everyone see the lab event server?
Yeah, I can see it, Derek. Yep.
Okay, cool.
Got it.
So this is one of the PowerShell scripts that we put together. You can run it in two ways. You can run it where it will specifically run against an event log that you have, or you can run it in a loop. For demonstration and testing purposes, the code that's pushed out to the repository loops every 20 seconds. Maybe that's not the frequency that you'd want to run on your production logs. So what's showing on the screen here is right before the webcast, I did a password spraying attack from 192.168.2.171, and I also did a Kerberoasting attack from 192.168.2.13. So essentially every 20 seconds this is going through the forwarded events log, and it's sending out an alert for password spraying and for Kerberoasting. And I think I probably took a little bit of Bo's thunder there, so sorry.
It's all good, man. All right, so password spraying, as Derek said, is something that is definitely worth alerting on in your environment. We have very good success rates, or very high success rates, I should say, with password spraying on pretty much any pen test we do. We typically tend to try to enumerate users first, which if you're on an internal network is a fairly easy thing to do. You can get the domain users from Active Directory domain. If you're externally, it might take a little bit more work, but it's still possible. You can do recon, figure out who works in an organization, figure out the username schema based off of, let's say, metadata in documents that are publicly available. And so what I mean by that is, sometimes you have people that are writing, I don't know, marketing kind of diagrams or documents that end up getting posted to like a public website. And if they haven't gone through the process of actually stripping that metadata, a lot of times the actual usernames that were used to create those files are included in the metadata for the files themselves, so we can kind of enumerate users that way externally. And then another good method externally is to basically just create a list of all the common names. So a lot of times we're using, like, let's say the top 100 first names, top 200 last names, and generate a list off of that, and then mangle that together. And then there's a number of different username enumeration vulnerabilities that we find on various applications. And then develop a good list of users that we can go password spray against, and then perform a password spraying attack. So password spraying is almost what I would consider the opposite of brute forcing. So with brute forcing, you typically would have one single account where you are essentially trying thousands and thousands of passwords. The problem with that is that you're going to quickly lock out accounts if they're tied to AD. So what password spraying essentially solves with that issue there is that you try one really good password across all the accounts. So you try something like Derek mentioned earlier. Season year is a great one because season year lines right up with the default password policy for most Windows domains, which is 90 days. So people just change the season to the current year, and then they're good to go. So spring 2017, summer 2017, fall 2017, we have very high success rates with. So like I said, so internally, it's pretty easy. We have a tool that we wrote called Domain Password Spray. It's a PowerShell tool that makes it a little easier to do internally. So it'll go and grab the fine-grained password policies from a domain, which we've actually been burned on that before, where if you just do net users / domain, you're going to get all the users from the domain. And sometimes those users are within fine-grained password policies that might have a different passwords policy outside of what you would see if you ran net accounts. So we have this tool that tries to check all the fine-grained password policies for any other possible password policies that are applied to other accounts in the domain, and then we'll remove those users from the list, or at least let you know what the lockout would be. This is me talking about like the tool part, but the attack is the main thing that I think people should really care about, because when you run this on a domain, it generates thousands of failed login attempts. But most people aren't really looking at thousands of failed login attempts from one system. They're looking at, is there 1,000 failed login attempts for one account? But most alerting systems don't typically tend to pick up on, oh man, 1,000 failed login attempts came from one IP address. And that's what will happen with password spraying, even if it's external. So externally, we typically end up hitting like OA, any ADFS environments, pretty much anything that we can find that looks like it's tied to AD, we try to hit, because VPN portals are typically tied to AD, and for the most part. So if we can get an AD credential, there's probably a good chance that we can VPN in, depending on whether or not there's two-factor. There's a lot of other things to consider. But additionally, externally, if we run into an O365 environment, there's O365 with having access to SharePoint, having access to email is a goldmine for an external attacker. So password spraying is one of those things that we do all the time. But again, it generates thousands of failed login attempts, and for your DC, you're gonna have all those failed login attempts available there. So to detect password spraying, Derek showed the script a bit ago. Basically, what we're looking at right now, and this is something that absolutely can be modifiable to your own domain, but what we kind of thought would be a good threshold is 10 failed login attempts from any IP in less than an hour is probably bad. If somebody's generating 10 failed login attempts in an hour, that's a lot of attempts. And I can kind of show you additionally kind of what Derek was hitting on there as well. So he showed basically running it in the loop mode, and so in order to kind of do that, so I guess the idea there is that what you would want to do is point our parser script at the file where you're getting your forwarded events from. So right now, I've got it pointed at a local Windows event file. It's this WinEvent logs application, the application Windows event file. But in your environment, you might want to like have a custom log directory and have like a forwarded events EVTX file that you point that at. And then what that will look like if you run it. So with PowerShell, like so, I guess I should preface this additionally with this script along with the next script that I'm going to talk about are standalone scripts, but they're also integrated into this CredDefense Toolkit. And Brian's going to touch on how to actually like use that from like a single platform, so to speak. But again, these scripts are totally standalone. You can run them separately if you want. So to check out the event parser script, let's first run. Oh, let me try that one more time. Bypass. There we go. And we're going to import the event or the CredDefense event parser first. And so what Derek was doing a minute ago, he was running it essentially in the loop mode, where it's if you just run invoke CredDefense event parser, it's just going to continually run, like he said, every 20 seconds. I would recommend probably doing it like every 5 minutes or something in your environment. You don't. So it depends on how often. I guess like you want to be alerted, right? And another thing that we should preface this with as well is we haven't actually included email alerting yet. It's a feature that we're going to add pretty soon. Right now, it just kind of alerts to the screen, and we're working on the email alerting part. But when it's running like that, it's basically just watching this file every 20 seconds, and it will parse the logs from there and tell you if any new events occurred. But if you point it at a specific file, so like this is a password spray file. This is basically what he showed a minute ago, where there were 11 failed login attempts in there, and so you see like a total of new event was detected in the last hour, and basically we'll let you know if somebody's performing password spraying on your network. So the next thing that we included, we thought that we're pen testers, right? So this is actually kind of a fun thing for us to do because we're kind of going from the pen tester side to doing more blue team stuff with this talk and with this tool specifically. But as pen testers, we use tools all the time that never get caught for the most part. And one of the main ones that we use pretty often is Responder. So what Responder does is it essentially, well, it does a lot of things, but some of the main stuff that it does is it does NBNS and LMNR spoofing. And if you haven't heard of or if you're not familiar with NBNS or LMNR, so NBNS is NetBIOS naming service, LMNR is link local multicast name resolution. The short answer of what those do are they're kind of the backups for DNS. So when DNS fails and you can't resolve a host on a network, your Windows system by default will resolve to trying to hit every single host on the local network, saying, "Hey, are you the server that I just tried to resolve? Hey, are you the server that I just tried to resolve?" And if you're an attacker on that network, you can respond to those hosts and say, "Hey, yes, I'm that guy that you're trying to connect to me." And when that happens, a lot of times what you can do is you can force that victim to connect to you over SMB, and it will attempt an authentication attempt, which will basically give you as an attacker their password hash. But furthermore, you can actually relay that to other hosts. So you don't even have to like crack the password. You can actually relay that authentication to another host on the network. And if, like, let's say they're an admin of the host that you are trying to relay to, you can get a shell on that host, which is awesome, right? So we use this pretty often. And we decided, all right, so what would be a good way to detect somebody who is just running Responder on a network? And so, looking through it, there's a number of tools out there already that kind of do it. But I noticed there's a few issues that existed with some of the current tools that are out there. Primarily, one of the main issues was with basically the native way in which NBNS, like the functionality of the way NBNS works to begin with, is it's meant to be a broadcast protocol. So whenever an NBNS packet is sent, it's broadcast to the network. And I found that most of the tools that are trying to detect Responder are doing that, which will detect Responder on a single subnet. It'll detect it if you're on the subnet with Responder. But it doesn't really work that well for hitting hosts that are like, let's say, on another subnet that you're not currently attached to. And then additionally, another way that we saw was that some tools will attempt to basically just do like the honey token kind of technique where they're just broadcasting, or not broadcasting, they're sending every single host on the network an authentication attempt over SMB. And when that happens, like if somebody takes that honey token, goes and cracks it, then you would be alerted to it. So one of the problems with that is, so like let's say they detected or they kind of were onto the fact that you're sending them a honey token, they might not go crack and not try to go log in with it, right? So you'll never be really alerted to the fact that they were using Responder. So what we kind of put together is a PowerShell tool that, hey, how's it going?
Good, good. Sorry, I feel bad interrupting you, but we had a question that kind of fit in, and I don't want to get too far ahead before we answer this question. Michael says, what is the definition of a failed login attempt? Is it just Windows event code 4771?
Yeah, it's event, let's see, 4625.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. So what we decided to do is we wanted to try to scan across multiple subnets because, as everyone here knows, like most environments are not just a single, /24, right? So we wanted to be able to scan across, NATed networks. We wanted to be able to alert immediately. So Responder Guard, when it hits Responder, it basically what happens is it's sending NBNS requests across the network to every single host on the network. Well, every single host in a list that you give it, right? So you can specify CIDR lists, and it will take in the CIDR list and then effectively hit every single host on NBNS and request a host name that is invalid, that should be invalid anyway. And if a responder responds to that and says, hey, yeah, I am that host, and sends the response back to Responder Guard, you'll know immediately that that's probably a responder on the network. And another tool for this, additionally, I should definitely call out is Ingve. So Kevin Robertson, he's actually already given me great feedback on some additional things that we can add into Responder Guard. It's actually really funny. Like, so he wrote Ingve, which is basically the PowerShell version of Responder. And 2 days after DerbyCon, after we got back, I get a message in our GitHub repo, basically calling out all these different things that he could basically add into Ingve to bypass Responder Guard. And I was like, awesome! Like, we gotta go fix that now. So it's cool to see offensive people wanting to help with the defensive stuff. But one of the other things that Responder Guard does is it writes immediately to the Windows event log, and that's kind of what we're picking up on with CredDefense. So whenever it detects Responder, writes to the Windows event log, and additionally has the ability to do honey tokens. So if you want to have like a secondary mechanism for detecting an attacker on the network, let's say that you got the log, you detected them, you knew that Responder was running, but you weren't fast enough to go stop them or find them and figure out who they were. Maybe they had a Dropbox and they picked it up and took it off network. Now they have a token, a honey token. If they go crack that and try to log in anywhere on your network, immediately, hey, this is the same bad guy. So let me show how this looks real quick.
Hey, Bo.
Yeah.
So Tim has a question. Would packet analysis provide a unique signature for Responder? Meaning, does a packet sent by Responder look different than one legitimately sent by Windows?
That's a great question. So it depends on how you set up Responder to begin with. So I believe there's a default challenge that gets sent across the network. I think it's like 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, all the way up to like 9 or something. So that might be something you could hit on. But I think there's a lot of different configuration options that might make it like a little bit stealthier to try to find just based off of analysis like that. I hope that answers it. But so
Cool.
yeah, so let me show Responder real quick. So this is Responder running on a Kali box. So the idea here is like this is somebody who's an attacker who just walks up, plugs into a port on the network, starts running Responder, listening for NBNS and LMNR events, right? And then I've got a Windows host here that we're gonna run Responder Guard from. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm sorry, I need to actually import the module first. So we're gonna import module Responder Guard, and then so there's a few different options that you can kind of choose to set or not. So the first one is -CIDR list, and this is basically your list of subnets that you're going to want to scan, right? So this is something you would want to go customize, figure out like where your hosts are on the network. I mean, you can give it you could give it like /8 if you wanted to go scan, like every IP on a /8, or if you just have a /24, hey, just run it against a /24. But this is where you would configure that. You also have, you don't have to write to the Windows event log if you don't want to, but the tag is -logging enabled to write to the event log. And then also there's the honey token seed option. So this is a very important aspect of it, because if you do the -honey token seed, it will attempt to send these honey token credentials that are set here in the script. So if you're going to run this, make sure that you already know either like what you want to alert on in terms of your honey user, and don't just send this, because it's literally going to send honey domain honey user to the attacker. So they're going to immediately know that this is not legit. But what I'd recommend doing is setting like a password that looks like it's meant to be a normal user. Summer 2017 fits. And then when you run it, it will attempt to hit those hosts in that list. So you'll see responder guard scan in progress, and there it is there. So it says responder guard received an NBNS request from the host at 192.168.88.245 for this host name. So so currently, like, this is one of those things that Kevin called out. He's like, yeah, so this 10 character kind of random string thing, I could probably hit on that and detect responder guard and not respond to it. So this is one of those things that I'm gonna try to like customize a bit more and add in, like, if you wanted to add in custom host names, or if we want to make it look just a little bit more legit, that's one of those things. So now if we go back over to our responder side, you'll see that we have a hit, and this is what your attacker would see. They'll see, okay, I poisoned an answer sent to 192.168.88.244, so that's our Windows host where we're running responder guard for that name. We see it's Windows 10, Here's the honey domain, honey user, and here's the hash of summer 2017, right? So now they go crack that, try to log in, we alert on the honey token activity. And then additionally, the other thing that is the big kicker is that it now logged to the Windows event log. So if we go refresh, we have responder guard hit here, and the Windows event log says an NBNS spoofer was discovered at 192.168.88.245. Send that to your whatever SIM you got. Now you have an alert for responder on the network. So that is responder guard. And I think, let's see, I think that is it. I had a couple screenshots in this presentation of exactly what I just showed you. But now we are on to the password auditing portion, which I believe Brian is going to take over at this point.
All right. So yeah, let's talk about password auditing. And for basically with password auditing, what we're trying to do is we spoke earlier about some of the different passwords that we normally see with environments. Oh, excuse me, 1 second. That's why you should have a glass of water near you. But basically, we're trying to find things such as users that have summer 2017, winter 2017, all those things that are going to be easy for an attacker to find if they're on your environment. Additionally, we want to look at some of the attributes that are set for passwords as well. So knowing whether you have users in your environments that don't require a password for logon, maybe users that have passwords that don't expire, and trying to hunt those down and find those and have a quick way to just grab out a list and know what you should go and look at and consider reconfiguring. Another big thing that you might want to look at in your environment is password reuse. So with password reuse, one of the big things we're looking at is, do you have privileged users on your network who have dual accounts? So they have their domain administrator account, but they also have their normal user account. Are they using the same password for both accounts? I mean, if they are, it kind of defeats the purpose of separating out those privileges. Maybe you have a person who's configuring shared accounts in your environment, and you're using the same password for 15, 20 different accounts in your environment. So it'd be good to find that out and do it, for an attacker does. So again, when we're talking about weak passwords, if you ask any pen tester, hey, what sees it as? I mean, they probably don't have to think about it. I mean, most people don't, but probably response time's a little bit quicker, a little bit less latency. It can tell you for either hemisphere. And when we're also, would we need a custom built cracker to crack your password? So if we get out the hashes, so we're able to grab some hashes from out of your environment, how hard is it to crack those hashes? Are we able to crack it with just a single iteration of CrackStation or the ROC list? Definitely want to look into that. Company spirit, so are people using things like the company name with a couple different numbers on the end of it? Again, just things that are easy for people to guess. And again, just talking about the password attributes, just a couple other things you might want to look at in addition to what I already spoke about was, do people have landman hashes enabled on their accounts? And in some cases, you can actually store passwords in unencrypted, passwords will get stored in unencrypted format within Active Directory. Okay, yeah, so just kind of going forward, again, I'm going through this kind of quick so we can get it all in because we have a couple demos here, so it's definitely cheetah speed, but just running through it fast. So another thing too with the password reuse is the widespread local administrator accounts. So a lot of times within environments, we'll see where the same password is used for the built-in local administrator accounts on Windows systems, and once you get that on one system, you're pretty much ready to go throughout the network. And so wanted to put together an easy to use tool for finding a lot of these issues within your environment. And what we have is a tool that's based off of the DS Internals project by Michael Grafnetter. Super cool dude. I spoke with him a little bit. He's out of Czech Republic, but basically adapted some of his stuff into this framework and give it a sweet front end that we'll look at here. And what it does essentially is it uses the Active Directory replication sync feature. And so you just run this as a user with domain administrator privileges. And what it'll do is it'll go out, it'll basically make a replication of your AD information. It'll pull that over to your local system, but it'll keep it all in memory, so it's not writing out to disk. And then at that point, you can perform the audit. It's actually pretty easy, pretty simple to get up and running. All right, so for one of the things we didn't talk about in the presentation at DerbyCon is how to grab all this, get it set up, going. So I'm just going to run through that real quick. So if you hop on there and you think, wow, this is like a hot mess in terms of the repo structure, you are correct, and we will fix that at some point. But if you would like to play around with it, easy way would just be go out, grab Visual Studio Community Edition. It's free. It's easy to get set up. Open it up. Hop into Team Explorer. From Team Explorer, you have this little connect button up here. Just click that, clone, and then you can do the URL of the repo. Just going to be on github.com, and it's just CredDefense /CredDefense. Spell it correctly. Yep. Let's go ahead and clone. We'll pull everything down. And for the rest of the presentation, we will all sit quietly and watch the loading bar. And go. No, not too bad. So once it's cloned down, you can go ahead, just double-click it to open it, double-click the solution, and it should load up the project for you. So at this point, you've got everything imported. All you have to do, just go ahead and go up to build, do rebuild of the solution. Everything's already set up for you, so you don't have to do anything else, any configuration stuff. Once it is built, you can just hop into, by default, it should be go to your username source repos, and then hop into the repo name, hop into build under CredDefense, and then you have the CredDefense exe. All right, so once you're there, you'll want to run this as a domain administrator, some of the equivalent privileges, but right now I'm running as a domain admin on my environment. I'm gonna go ahead, just double click the exe, and I get this sweet, very minimalistic GUI. As I mentioned in our presentation at DerbyCon, if somebody would make us a logo, like a sweet logo, that would be cool. We were very much willing to incorporate that and get that on the background. So anything you guys come up with.
You should email it to me, and then I can use it on the web blog posts and stuff. So email it to seer@bhas.co.
And stickers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lots of places. So, all right. So once once you've got it open here, you have a couple different options. So what we're talking about right now is the password auditing. So go ahead, select that, and click Next. And what'll happen is it'll look at the forest that you're in, and it'll grab out all the domains within that forest. So maybe you're on one domain in the environment, but you would like to perform the password auditing on a different domain. You're able to do that. So you can select out the domain. I'm going to select that, and then it will give you a list of all the domain controllers within that domain. So just pick the domain that you would like to target. So basically, the domain from which you'd like to grab the Active Directory information. Go and click Next. It'll go ahead and confirm the information so far. Next, choose a password file. And for our purposes here, I'm going to grab the RockU list. Go ahead and open that. Now go ahead and choose your save directory. So let's go ahead and just throw this on desktop. I'm going to call it demo results. Save. And at that point, just go ahead and click Run, and it'll pop up with just a couple little debugging confirmation messages. It says that it created the connection, so now everything should be good to go. At this point, it'll just sit there, and the GUI won't respond. That's fine. That's normal. At some point, we'll put in a loading bar. Yep, not responding. That's fine. Don't worry. It's not crashing. No, it's kind of the natural reaction for me, anyways, when I see the not responding to things are going terribly wrong. But in this case, things are going terribly right. Oh, yep. All right, so it should take about 30 seconds. So let's give it just another 10 or 15 seconds here. And so this is on an environment that has over 30,000 users in Active Directory, over 30,000 unique hashes. And so, again, it's going out, it's grabbing down all that information. It's performing a bunch of different checks on it, including running the entire RockU list against those password hashes.
Come on, demo gods.
Yeah. On work. And if it doesn't finish while we're on the demo, here, that's fine.
Brian, did you sacrifice enough chickens this morning?
I did 3. I probably should have done 4.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
man.
Hey guys, here's a question. Another question from Tim. Does this password audit being shown run a brute force attack against LDAP, or is it dumping the hashes and attempting to crack them?
It is dumping the hashes and attempting to crack them. So it pulls all the hashes over to your local machine, the machine that you're running this on, and then it'll try and crack them. And so it looks like this might not finish during the time here. I'm not sure why. Usually it takes about 30 seconds to run, but lucky for us, I have previous results though. We can check out those previous results.
Like when you're on a cooking show, you pop it in the oven, you open the other oven, and it's done.
Yeah, just like that. It's magic. All right. So when it does finish, you'll get a results file that looks like this. So you'll get just some information about when you ran it, and the oh, actually there it is. It finished. All right. We'll look at that one. Cool. So we've got just some information, the date on which you ran it, and then some different things that it found. So here are users with passwords that never expire, users that have the admin delegation turned on. And so any user that's found to be a domain admin within the environment, they'll get tagged with an AD flag. So you can see things like password not required, accounts that don't have a password. And here we see users with, and it shows a hash here. What this is it's showing all the users in your environment who are using or who have this as their password hash. And so basically this password reuse amongst these accounts. You see that we have some of the domain administrators, or a domain administrator that has the same password as normal other users within the environment. So you'd want to check that out. And here are accounts that we're actually able to crack. So we have Winter 2017 worked for this account, Super Cool 1, and got a DA here, a DA here. And then at the bottom, you get some statistics. So like I said, normally this takes only about 30 seconds to run, but in this case, it took 140 seconds to run, of course, when we want to demo it. Gives you, how many cracked, domain administrators cracked, and then it'll give you some information on password use in your environment. So that's the password auditing tool. All right, so let's talk about password filters. So the password auditing is fantastic, and definitely recommend playing around with that every once in a while. But it would be nice to have a solution that rather than finding those issues after the fact, finding the weak passwords after the fact, just preventing users from setting those weak passwords altogether. And we do have the Windows complexity requirements. So the standard Windows complexity 8-character minimum, 3 of the 4 following, uppercase, lowercase, special, numeric, and change it every 90 days. But and I mean, what do we see that meets those requirements, but is still people can remember it and can come up with that password pretty quickly? It's current season, current year, things like or the next thing where basically people just take the day that they had to reset their password and make that their password. I've definitely seen that a couple different times. And also things just involving different iterations of whatever their company name is. So, I mean, you can do things like increasing the length requirement, which we definitely highly recommend that you still go out and do. Anytime we hit an environment where we see something like a 14 or 15-character minimum for their passwords, the success rate of our password spraying goes down dramatically. I'm not saying that we don't ever get any within those environments, but we're definitely not popping them out left and right. It becomes much harder. So still very much recommend going out and increasing that length requirement. But yeah, you might still end up with users doing some things like, instead of summer 2017, maybe I'll do summer 2017 and add an exclamation point, things like that. So how can we get around that without just making outrageous requirements for people's passwords? Well, there's a feature that Windows has called a password filter. And basically, to implement the password filter, you can do it manually. So you can go out and you can get some of their instructions on how to do it, but it requires basically modifying a DLL, building your own DLL, manually deploying that out to all the domain controllers in your environment, setting registry keys, and it's kind of a pain. There are some commercial tools that exist for doing this, and there are a few open source tools, but again, the open source tools don't really help with the automation or ease the deployment of it. The one project that we did base this off of, though, is the Open Password Filter project, which is great to kind of get the framework set up for the DLL and some of the other code that you need. So we took that, just added some extra features, optimizations, and then put it into an easy deployable kind of interface. And on top of being able to easily deploy this to all the domain controllers in your environment, you can remove the features from the domain controllers, but you can also very easily update the password list that you're using. So once you've got this set up in your environment, you can just go ahead, you can just take your password list, add passwords, remove passwords, whatever, and it'll deploy it out to all the domain controllers in your environment that are running this feature. And another thing that we added is that you can do, it's case insensitive, and it also does substring matching rather than direct comparison. So rather than having to write out winter 2017, winter 2018, winter 2019, so on and so forth, you can just put winter, you can put summer, June, whatever, and it'll go and it'll prevent people from setting any password that contains those substrings. So what does that look like? Well, again, I'm going to pop up in our interface here. Go back to the main menu, select password filtering. You get two options here. You can do install, uninstall, or update the password list. First, we'll do install, uninstall. All right. Once you're here, you'll get two columns. The one on the left are domain controllers within your environment that do not have this feature installed. On the right are ones on which you've configured it. And so you do have to install this on all the domain controllers that are running the Active Directory role in your environment, just because in the event that a user goes to change their password and they end up doing that against a domain controller that does not have this installed, then it's not going to work. So basically, just select the domain controller you want to install it on, click install. It'll tell you that it's updated, then ask you to restart it. So for the installation, you do have to restart the domain controller. But once it's installed and you do updates, you don't have to do any resets. it'll just update and you'll be good to go. So that's going to take a minute to reset. So we're not going to wait for that. Instead, I'm going to go back and once you've got it installed and you want to update the list, you can just go here, update the password list.
Hey, while you're doing that, I have a question, a couple questions actually.
Yep.
So Tim said, as a blue teamer, would something like CredDefense be generally accepted by a business, or is this something that we should consult the legal team with before using?
That is a good question. I would say consult your legal team if you think I'm not going to give you legal advice. I do not know what's acceptable in the different people's organizations, so I would go with the latter.
Okay.
But,
Yes,
yeah.
other people agree. Always consult the legal team. So there
Yeah.
you go, Tim.
Yep.
Can you output this to PowerShell? This was the
Output.
question. This was a question from a while ago when you were showing the last demo.
Okay. Are they, sorry, just to clarify, are they asking, can we output the results to PowerShell, or can this be run from within PowerShell?
I think it was results.
Results?
Yeah.
So the results just get put out as a text file, but you could probably do some modifications to, I guess, give it like a interface within PowerShell. So maybe.
All right,
depending on what
Micah,
you're
if
trying
you
to
have some clarifying question and you're still on, you can go ahead. And if you guys have to leave, you can go ahead and leave. We are recording this, so we will just finish it up and put the recording out. So, yeah.
Cool. Yep. And so again, you have the install uninstall feature. Over here on the left is would be domain controllers where it's not installed. On the right, domain controllers that you have configured on which you've configured this. So you can just select the domain controller install, domain controller uninstall, pretty straightforward. Updating, here it is. Go ahead and double click it. And now you have all the domain controllers on which this is installed. And do edit password, pop up in this notepad document. Yeah. Add password, save it, and deploy updates. And there you go. And so, so that's pretty much it. And so now, whenever a user tries to change their password, just through the normal change password feature interface, if they pick a password that contains any of the words in that list, they'll basically just get the message saying that they could not, that they don't meet the complexity requirements. So. And so, yep, references, links, you guys, for some of the stuff we were talking about here, just to consolidate it so you don't have to go looking through the slides. And again, kind of what we're going for here, just go back to what Derek was saying at the beginning, is, we, a lot of times, I mean, when we put out different material, presentations, all that, we're talking about how can you break things, cool little tricks that we've done, how we pwned organizations, and really red team heavy type things. And so with this, I mean, we really wanted to focus on how can we try to help people stop these different attacks, and just getting together this open source framework that's hopefully easy to use, people can contribute to, and overall make our jobs harder. and again, it's a work in progress. Any help that you guys can give us, any suggestions, we would absolutely love it. So hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, on the blog, or yeah, just hit up the repo as well to submit any issues, anything you guys want. So
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, we don't have any other questions, so I think that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for joining us, and check out the blog for more information.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks for joining, and we'll see you again. Bye.